The restaurant had the kind of lighting that turned everyone into a softer version of themselves. Amber, forgiving, cinematic. A pianist was playing something French and unobtrusive in the corner, and the room smelled faintly of truffle and candle wax. Ethan sat across from Lila at a table dressed in white linen and restraint. 10 years. A decade of anniversaries that had turned from surprises to rituals, then obligations. Tonight was supposed to be a return, to remember why. He told her a story. It wasn't meant to impress, only to confess. About a pitch at the fund that had gone wrong, a model that didn't hold, a presentation that fell apart when the numbers refused to be obedient. He laughed at himself first, trying to turn failure into something human, maybe even endearing. He looked up, expecting empathy, or at least warmth. But Lila laughed too, sharp, unguarded, not the kind of laugh shared between allies, but the kind that leaves a mark. It cut through the low music and landed with precision. Her head tilted slightly, hair grazing her shoulder, eyes bright, not with kindness, but with distance. Around them, silverware stilled for a second, and a waiter hesitated before pouring wine. Ethan froze. The air between them turned cold, dense, impossible to swallow. He watched her reclaim her poise, saw the faint blush of self-awareness on her cheek, the way she smoothed it over with a sip of champagne. "You always take things so seriously," she said lightly, as if humor could erase the fracture. He nodded, smiled the way a man smiles when the truth has just arrived uninvited. The rest of dinner unfolded in small, careful gestures, the bread broken without appetite, the conversation skimming the surface, her phone lighting up twice under the tablecloth, his silence expanding to fill the room. When dessert came, a small cake with gold lettering reading, "A decade of us." He thought of how absurd it looked, how forced the celebration felt. The bill arrived in a black leather folder. Ethan reached for it automatically. Paying was easier than talking, and numbers at least behaved when you told them what to do. He slipped his card in, signed his name neatly, and stood. Lila looked up, startled. "You're leaving?" He met her eyes, and for the first time in months, there was no pleading in his expression, no wish for her to understand. Just quiet recognition. "I think we're done performing," he said softly. Outside, the October air was a different kind of truth. Cold, clean, without pretense. The city pulsed around him, taxis flashing by, laughter spilling from bars, strangers crossing streets without looking back. He walked down Madison, hands in pockets, tie loosened, the taste of champagne and salt still in his mouth. Behind him, the restaurant shimmered like a stage lit for someone else's story. Ahead, the night opened, unscripted, brutal, honest. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what came next, and that uncertainty felt almost like freedom. The apartment had always been immaculate. Lila's taste rendered in beige and glass, curated like a showroom meant to impress visitors rather than hold a life. After that dinner, Ethan began to see the cracks that had been hiding in plain sight. They weren't loud or cinematic, just small fractures, hairline and precise, the kind that travel quietly through a structure until one day it gives way. It started with captions, the first time she changed his words. He had written under a photo of them at a charity gala, 10 years in, still choosing each other. When it appeared on her feed, it read instead, "Growth never stops, personally and professionally." His face was there, smiling, tux crisp, hand resting at her waist. But he was a prop beside the woman in the gold dress whose followers commented, "Power couple goals." He told himself it didn't matter. Everyone edits their lives online. But one night, scrolling through her tagged posts, he realized how invisible he'd become. There were fewer photos of them together, more of her with clients, influencers, the sleek, hungry people orbiting the industry she loved. When she did include him, he was cropped mid-gesture or framed like a neutral background, steady, supportive, safely forgettable. Then came the late nights. She called them client dinners, always said with a half laugh, as if anticipating doubt. He never accused her. He only asked if she was tired, if the pace was sustainable. "This is what leveling up looks like," she would say, keys jangling, perfume already on her wrist. "Don't make it sound like a crime." The phrase lodged itself in him, leveling up, as if love was a game and he'd stopped keeping score. By summer, their apartment had grown silent. They coexisted in parallel lanes, her in the bedroom, lit by laptop glow, him on the couch, half listening to news anchors narrate a world as fractured as theirs. He could measure the distance between them in trivial domestic moments. 2 mugs left out, her blazer on the chair he used to sit in, the untouched half of their bed. When she traveled for a week on business, he tried to reset. Cleaned the apartment, cooked dinner, even left flowers on the counter. She returned, smiled absently, and said, "You didn't have to go through all that trouble." It wasn't cruel. It was worse. Casual indifference. One night, after another dinner where she'd been half present and half elsewhere, Ethan lay awake and realized he couldn't remember the last time she'd looked at him without calculation. The thought hollowed him out. By morning, the decision had already formed, not in anger, but in quiet clarity. He booked a short-term sublet in Queens, a narrow apartment with thin walls, cheap furniture, and a window that looked out onto a fire escape. It smelled faintly of detergent and rain. When he moved in, he brought only 2 suitcases and a coffee maker, the Testistomaful. First night there, the silence was different. Not the kind that isolates, but the kind that exhales. He sat by the window, listening to traffic on Roosevelt Avenue, the city's hum stripped of pretense. For the first time in months, no one was watching him perform a role. He was just a man, sitting alone, finally honest with himself. It happened on a Wednesday, one of those gray Manhattan mornings when the air feels like wet paper. Ethan was halfway through replying to a client email when a notification slid across his screen. A shared calendar invite, accidentally sent to his old joint address with Lila. The subject line read, "Pitch Deck Review, Mason, Park Hyatt Bar, 8 p.m. He stared at it longer than he should have, not because the words themselves were damning, but because they were familiar. That was the same night she'd said she was stuck at the office. Voice light, unbothered, background noise of clinking glasses behind her. He remembered her saying, "Don't wait up. It's one of those nights." Curiosity isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's a reflex of survival. He opened her old laptop, the one she'd stopped using but never wiped. The password hadn't changed. The inbox unfolded like a quiet betrayal. No explicit declarations. Nothing so crude it could be printed and condemned. Just tone, rhythm, familiarity. Subject lines like, "You're a lifesaver." Replies like, "Only because you know how to make me feel heard." An emoji of a wink. Another of a flame. A chain of messages arranged like choreography. where work bled into warmth, then into something unprofessional, and finally, intimate. Mason. The name echoed in his mind, slick and forgettable. A high-profile client, 40-something, too confident in the way people who never lose tend to be. Ethan had met him once at a networking event. Perfect teeth, handshake like a performance. Mason had complimented Lila's instincts, said she had a future in strategic persuasion. At the time, Ethan thought it was harmless. Now, reading the time-stamped exchanges, he saw the evolution. From flattery to familiarity, from late-night decks to dinner reservations disguised as meetings. The discovery didn't ignite fury. It induced something quieter, colder. The kind of calm that precedes irreversible choices. He didn't throw the laptop, didn't call her, didn't scroll for the kind of proof that would humiliate. He simply sat back in his chair and listened to the rain hitting the window, one drop at a time, like an indifferent metronome. He began to document, not out of revenge but out of need for coherence. Screenshots, calendar entries, receipts he'd kept without meaning to. Not as ammunition, but as truth made tangible. He arranged them in a folder labeled Clarity. That night, he wrote a letter in longhand. The pen scratched against cheap paper from his sublet desk, the ink smudging slightly under his palm. It wasn't an accusation, it was a map of hurt drawn without rage. He wrote of distance, of how laughter had become performance, how ambition had devoured intimacy. He wrote that he wasn't seeking confession or spectacle, only honesty. One final conversation where neither of them needed to act. When he finished, the letter was 5 pages long. He folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and addressed it simply. Lila. The next morning, he sent a text. I'd like to talk. Just us. No narratives. No audience. Her reply came hours later. Dinner tomorrow? The apartment? He stared at the message, thumb hovering. For a moment, he imagined her rehearsing what to say, how to spin it, how to turn guilt into gray area. But then he thought of the rain again. Steady, cleansing, unpretentious. He typed back. Yes. But let's make it honest this time. And for the rest of the day, as the city throbbed outside, Ethan felt a strange calm settle in. The quiet before truth enters a room and changes its temperature forever. The apartment smelled faintly of bergamot and something metallic, Lila's perfume mixing with the unease in the air. She had set the table as if civility could disguise consequence. 2 plates, wine already poured, a candle burning low enough to flatter rather than illuminate. When Ethan walked in, she greeted him with the kind of practiced calm that people wear before a meeting they intend to control. He placed the envelope, the letter, on the counter. You've read it? He asked. I did, she said, folding her napkin though she hadn't touched the food. And I think you're over-interpreting. He waited. She exhaled, a short, efficient sound. Mason and I, what you saw, it wasn't what you think. It was networking. Relationship management. It's not emotional, Ethan. It's strategy adjacent. She smiled, faintly embarrassed by her own phrasing. You know how this industry works. Everything is optics. Connections are currency. He studied her. The woman he'd once known, earnest, sharp, lit by conviction, was gone. In her place stood a publicist, even in private, fluent in self-preservation. So, intimacy is collateral damage? He asked quietly. Intimacy is complicated, she said. We've changed. You stopped showing up. I carried the brand alone for years. He frowned. The brand. Us, she corrected quickly. Our life. Marriage isn't just about love anymore. It's positioning, storytelling. People look up to us. Clients, friends, family. They see stability, ambition. That matters. Ethan leaned back, letting her words settle like dust. He realized she wasn't confessing or defending. She was presenting a case, a narrative that kept her untarnished. You're turning our marriage into a campaign, he said finally. But intimacy doesn't survive inside optics. It needs something ugly, real, private. Her jaw tightened. You think walking out fixes that? No, he said. Walking out acknowledges it's already broken. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, traffic hummed like static. The city was alive, oblivious. Lila's phone buzzed on the counter. She flipped it face down without looking. He pulled a folded document from his jacket. I wrote something else, he said. Terms, clean, simple, fair. You keep the apartment. I'll handle the lease until the renewal. Joint savings split evenly. No press, no friends dragged in, no narrative. We close this quietly. Her eyes flicked toward the paper. You already planned this. I had to, he said. You build your world by managing perception. I'm trying to build mine by telling the truth. She reached for the glass of wine, hands trembling slightly despite the polished tone. So that's it? 10 years reduced to legal lines? It's not reduction, he said. It's boundaries. The only kind of mercy left. The candle guttered, throwing unsteady light across her face. For the first time that night, she looked almost human again, scared, small, as if the armor had thinned. And if I don't sign? She asked. He hesitated, then answered with a gentleness that hurt more than anger could. Then we keep lying, but not together. Silence filled the apartment, thick and final. She turned away first, staring at the city through the window, the skyline glowing like an advertisement for dreams neither of them could afford anymore. Ethan stood, slid his letter toward her, and said softly, You can have the last word, but make it honest. Then he left, his reflection vanishing from the glass as the door clicked shut behind him. In the empty apartment, Lila poured another glass of wine and stared at the document, its edges sharp under the candlelight. The city outside kept shining, indifferent, selling light to anyone who could no longer tell the difference between visibility and love. Autumn slipped into winter almost without permission. The leaves outside their old apartment turned brittle and fell, gathering in gutters like the remains of polite conversations. Ethan hadn't spoken to Lila in weeks, but the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure rearranged into new forms, carried through phone calls that began with sympathy and ended in advice. Lila's mother called first. Margaret Carr had the voice of a woman who'd learned to make disappointment sound refined. You don't walk away from a good match, Lila, she said, her tone more managerial than maternal. A marriage is a merger, not a mood. Ethan is solid, dependable. That's rare. You've worked too hard to start over. Just fix it before the world notices. Lila listened, eyes closed, sitting in her car outside the agency where she worked. The windshield reflected the skyscrapers above, sharp, unyielding, ambitious. Margaret kept talking, about reputation, about stability, about how perception was half of survival. Lila said she understood, because she did. In her world, Failure was a contagion, and confession the first symptom. 2 states away, Ethan's parents were on speakerphone in his modest Queens apartment, their Midwestern accents softening the edges of his solitude. His mother cried quietly. His father spoke in pragmatic sentences. "Son, marriage isn't perfect. People stumble. You've got to find grace before you find endings." "I'm trying," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure it was true. Grace felt like a foreign language, something he once studied but never mastered. He looked around the apartment. Second-hand furniture, an unfinished coffee mug, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Nothing glamorous, but honest. That counted for something. Meanwhile, Manhattan kept moving, indifferent to personal heartbreak. Lila's agency glowed with late-night ambition. The glass conference rooms were lit like aquariums filled with sleek, tireless creatures. A rumor had started. Something about blurred boundaries with a client. A compromised account. No names attached, but everyone knew. PR people always did. Lila felt the shift in the air. Smiles turning measured. Compliments landing too softly. Her boss, polished and perfumed, summoned her into a meeting. "There's chatter," he said. "We can manage it, but we need a story. Not a confession, a story. Spin it as overcommitment. You care too much, work too hard. Turn exposure into devotion." She nodded, taking notes, her pulse a steady ache behind her ribs. This was her language. Control through narrative. She could handle this. She always had. But that night, as she drafted the internal memo, her hands trembled. The document she typed sounded like someone else entirely. She thought of Ethan's last words. "You can have the last word, but make it honest." They echoed now, unwanted, under the mechanical buzz of office lights. At the same time, Ethan's world turned slower but clearer. He began running in the mornings along the East River, where fog blurred the skyline into a watercolor of steel and regret. He wasn't rebuilding yet, just learning to writhe without rehearsing. Across the river, Lila's phone vibrated again. Her mother, a client, a journalist seeking comment. All voices of the same chorus. "Fix it. Frame it. Don't fall." The city outside pulsed like a lie she had once believed. That merit and ambition could justify anything. That visibility equaled worth. That night, she stood by her window. Manhattan spread out beneath her like circuitry. Each light, another person selling a version of themselves. The myth of progress hummed all around her. Bright, constant, merciless. And for the first time she wondered what it might cost to tell the truth in a city built entirely on performance. The truth arrived without drama, just a quiet email at 1:43 a.m. from someone Lila barely noticed most days. Her assistant, Nina, had written only 3 lines. "I can't keep covering for this. You should see what Mason sent." Attached was a forwarded message chain. No commentary, no malice. Just evidence, clean and devastating. The thread began like any client correspondence. Polite follow-ups, deliverables, talk of timelines. Then it shifted, as all blurred lines do, almost imperceptibly. Compliments that edged too close. Invitations phrased as jokes. Screenshots of text messages. Late-night check-ins that had nothing to do with campaigns. And finally, one unambiguous line from Mason. "Wish you were here instead of your husband. He doesn't see you the way I do." Lila read it twice, pulse thudding in her ears. It wasn't just the words, it was the timestamp. A night she remembered clearly. She had told Ethan she was crashing early, claimed exhaustion. Instead, she had stayed at the Park Hyatt suite Mason had booked for the client summit. The irony was unbearable. Her entire profession revolved around crafting versions of reality. Now the unfiltered one stared back, undeniable and raw. For hours, she sat at her kitchen counter, laptop open, phone dark. The candle she'd forgotten to blow out had melted into a shallow pool of wax. She scrolled through the emails again, hunting for loopholes, for angles, for anything that could make this survivable. But this wasn't rumor or conjecture. It was arithmetic. Cause, effect, evidence. Every text, every receipt, every careful half-truth had linked itself into a narrative no spin could redeem. By dawn, she was still there, in yesterday's clothes, the city waking beneath her window. The hum of early delivery trucks mingled with the whisper of humiliation in her mind. She thought of Ethan, how quietly he had walked out, how measured his letter had been. He must have known. He had already pieced together the puzzle. He just hadn't needed to shout. At 9, Nina came into the office to find Lila already there. No makeup, no heels, no performance. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Nina said softly, lingering by the door. "You didn't," Lila answered, voice flat but steady. "You just stopped helping me lie." The day moved like an autopsy. Her boss called her in, shut the door, and asked if the rumors were substantiated. She wanted to deny it. God, she almost did. But the fatigue of constant control had hollowed her out. "They are," she said, "but not the way people think." That admission cost her everything she valued: the polished reputation, the client account, the illusion of mastery. Yet as she walked out of the meeting, badge turned in, there was a strange quiet inside her. Not peace, just the absence of noise. That evening, she sat on her couch staring at the skyline, lights blinking like Morse code she no longer understood. The phone buzzed with missed calls from her mother, texts from friends, each one a lifeline wrapped in judgment. She ignored them all. Somewhere across the river, Ethan was probably still in his Queens apartment, maybe reading, maybe cooking something simple. She imagined the calm of his space, the absence of constant curation. For the first time, she envied him, not his decency, not his distance, but his ability to exist without needing to be watched. When the sky dimmed to violet, she opened a blank email draft to him. No subject line, no strategy, just her hands hovering over the keys, trembling. She typed one sentence, then deleted it. Then another. Words failed her, as if language itself had turned against her after years of misuse. Finally, she wrote 3 simple words. No apology, no explanation, just the only truth left to offer. "You were right." She hit send before she could think, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark, the city humming beyond the glass. For the first time in her career, she had no story to tell. Only evidence, silent and irreversible. The kitchen had changed, but not enough. Ethan noticed that first. The way the marble island still gleamed under recessed lights, the same designer stools pushed neatly in place, the faint scent of citrus polish. Only the air was different now. Heavier, as if memory itself lingered in the walls. Lila stood by the sink, barefoot, dressed in the muted efficiency of someone who hadn't slept. Her hair was tied back. her face pale without its usual armor. When Ethan entered, she turned but didn't move closer. For a moment, they just regarded each other, two actors who'd stepped off a long-running stage and forgotten their lines. He placed a folder on the island between them, a neutral gesture, deliberate. "It's all written down," he said quietly. "What I think is fair, what I think is decent." She glanced at it but didn't touch it. "You didn't have to come," she murmured. "I did," he said. "Emails and lawyers can't finish what honesty started." The silence that followed was thick, almost reverent. A cab horn echoed faintly from the street below, the city moving on without them. He opened the folder, sliding out a single page, typed, calm, precise. "3 things," he said. 1. You talk to HR and step off Mason's account. Do it yourself, cleanly. No spin. Her mouth tightened. "They already know." "Then confirm it," he said. "Own it. Don't let someone else write your ending." She looked down at the counter, fingers tracing the edge of the stone. "And the others?" 2. Tell our families the truth," he continued. "No PR language, just the version that actually happened." Her laugh was quiet, brittle. "You really think my mother will let me?" "I don't care about her permission," Ethan said. "This isn't for her. It's for you." "And 3?" she asked. He met her eyes. "If you can't do the first 2, we sign the divorce papers, quietly. No spectacle, no blame, no, he said, she said, just finality." The clock on the wall ticked softly. Lila leaned against the counter, arms crossed as if bracing herself against an invisible wind. "You came all this way to negotiate my redemption," she said. "No," he replied. "I came to protect my dignity, and maybe yours, if you'll let me." She opened the letter he'd written months ago, the one she had never responded to. His handwriting, patient and steady, filled the page. It wasn't bitter. It spoke of limits, not punishments. "I won't shout or expose or destroy, but I won't participate in illusion anymore." When she reached the end, she set it down carefully, as if it might burn her fingers. "You make it sound easy," she whispered. "It isn't," he said. "But it's simple." Her eyes filled. Not dramatically, just the slow accumulation of someone who's finally out of excuses. "And if I do all that? If I come clean? If I lose everything?" "Then you start over," Ethan said. "Not as a brand, as a person." He waited, giving her time, but she said nothing. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the space between them. Finally, he gathered his coat, paused by the doorway, and added, "You don't owe me forgiveness, just truth." She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "And you?" "I'll be fine," he said. "I already started." He left the letter and the folder on the island, then walked out. Lila stood there long after the door closed, staring at the paper like it was both a verdict and a map. Outside, the evening light stretched across the tiles, pale and forgiving. She picked up the pen, hesitated, and for the first time in months, didn't think about how it would look, only what it would mean. Winter came quietly, without ceremony, just a thin layer of frost on car windows and breath that turned to smoke in the morning air. The city, impatient as ever, didn't pause for personal losses. It simply absorbed them, as it always did, into its constant hum of ambition and forgetting. Lila sat in a smaller office now, 12 floors lower than the one she'd once ruled. The new agency specialized in local nonprofits, not global campaigns. The furniture was mismatched, the coffee burnt, the clients earnest instead of glamorous. Her title was smaller too, senior associate, not director. But the weight on her chest had lifted. Here, no one asked for performance. They asked for presence. The day she resigned from her old firm, she did it in person. No spin, no euphemisms, just a statement of fact. She had crossed lines, blurred trust, and cost the agency a client. Her boss had blinked in disbelief. "You're really putting that in writing?" he'd asked. "Yes," she'd said. "It's the only thing I haven't edited." Now she arrived early, left late, and took the subway home like everyone else. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the train window and almost recognize herself again. Tired, yes, but real. The glitter had gone out of her life, replaced by a quieter kind of honesty that didn't need witnesses. Ethan, across the river, had learned to live with solitude as something more than absence. His Queen's apartment, once temporary, had begun to feel like a place earned rather than escaped to. He cooked now, not extravagantly, but intentionally. He found comfort in ritual, chopping onions, brewing coffee at dawn, the rhythm of ordinary competence. On weekends, he volunteered to mentor interns at the community data lab, the kind of work that no one tweeted about, but mattered anyway. He'd stopped checking Lila's social media months ago. The account still existed, but her captions had changed. Shorter, quieter, free of hashtags. Once, out of curiosity, he scrolled far enough to see a photo she'd posted of a city street at dusk. No people in it, just the caption, "Starting again, without pretending." He didn't like or comment. He simply closed the app and smiled faintly. That was enough. Their divorce finalized in a courthouse room that smelled faintly of dust and hand sanitizer. No shouting, no theatrics, just signatures, acknowledgement, and the sound of a clerk stamping the end of a story. When they stepped outside, they shared one brief look, a silent agreement that neither of them had won or lost, only arrived at truth from opposite directions. That evening, Ethan walked along the East River. The skyline shimmered across the water, still beautiful, still indifferent. He thought about how their marriage had never been a tragedy, not really. Just two people who mistook performance for love until one of them stopped applauding. In her apartment, Lila deleted her last draft of a press release, an old reflex, now irrelevant. Instead, she wrote an email to Nina, thanking her for her courage. Then she opened a blank document and typed, "What does an honest life look like?" The cursor blinked, waiting, and for once she didn't rush to fill the silence. When spring came, it brought with it the kind of light that revealed everything: cracks in walls, dust on shelves, the texture of survival. Ethan opened his window, let the air in, and felt something almost like peace. Their story hadn't ended in flames or spectacle. It had burned quietly, down to its core, until what remained was clear enough to see through. And in that clarity, bare, imperfect, human, they both found the one thing neither had been chasing: a moral center reclaimed, a truth lived instead of curated. By February, the city had gone gray at the edges. The Hudson was a sheet of steel, and steam rose from manhole covers like the breath of something sleeping beneath the streets. Lila's days had shrunk to the size of her new office. 2 windows, a plant she kept forgetting to water, a desk scarred by years of someone else's effort. The agency specialized in community projects, not luxury campaigns. No rooftop cocktails, no hashtags. She signed emails with her full name now, not a title. When she'd resigned, she did it face to face, voice steady. "I crossed a line," she told her former boss, "and I'm done editing my mistakes." The silence that followed was worth more than applause. She walked out carrying only a coat and a single framed photo, her and Ethan at the start, before ambition rewrote them. Her new colleagues were younger, unguarded. They ate lunch at their desks, talked about rent and roommates, not metrics. In their company, Lila learned the slow language of humility. She took the subway home, earphones off, letting the city's noise replace the echo of self-marketing. Across the river, Ethan kept his Queens apartment. The radiator hissed in winter, and the floorboards creaked like an old companion. He cooked for himself now, simple meals, carefully plated out of habit. The quiet no longer accused him, it answered him. At work, he shifted to a smaller analytics team, one that valued precision over performance. On Saturdays, he taught data literacy at a community center, watching teenagers' faces light when numbers made sense. Sometimes he caught news of Lila, a mutual friend mentioning she'd moved agencies, a stray photo on LinkedIn with no filters, just her and a clipboard at a charity event. Once he found her name on a donor list for a domestic violence nonprofit. He stared at it longer than he meant to, then closed the page, not in anger, but in recognition. Their divorce papers had come back stamped and final in a beige envelope. He read them once, filed them, and went for a walk along the East River. The wind off the water was sharp enough to clear the last of the ache. He realized he didn't need to rewrite the story anymore. It had already ended in the only honest way it could. Lila, meanwhile, had begun to write again, not press releases, but a notebook she kept in her bag. Lines of thought, fragments of days. "Accountability is quieter than guilt," one page read. Another. "I don't miss who I was. I miss not knowing better." She didn't plan to publish them. The act of writing was enough. When spring finally broke through the gray, Ethan left his window open for the first time. Morning light pooled on the kitchen table, catching the rim of his coffee mug. Somewhere across the river, Lila might have been seeing the same sun, starting her day among people who expected truth instead of polish. Their story had ended without spectacle. No shouting, no revenge, no grand finale. Just two lives re-entering their proper scale. The fairy tale had dissolved, and in its absence something sturdier remained. Clarity, earned and unadorned. They had not saved each other, but they had both remembered how to stand.